Alright, boys and girls, this is Brad from EastCoastAngel, and today we're going to do an A4 teardown. This one was sent in by Kevin. He had a list of other things that are going to be done to this gun. We're going to be swapping out a battery. I've got a new set of grips that we're going to be putting on it. Got a new feed neck. We're going to be using Inception Designs feed neck with the high-rise adapter. Goes on the gun really slick, and I think dollar for dollar it is the best feed neck that is available. And we're going to be putting a new breech knob on because this one did not come with one. Alright, so let's get right to it. Okay, and like most of the time when I'm doing these videos, I like to start out with taking off the non-essential items, which would be your airline and your ASA. You can leave that on, you can take it off. It's really up to you. Personally, I think I'm going to just leave it on there just because at the moment anyway, it is not in the way. It's not causing any issues, but we do have the option of taking it off if you want. This one's actually a CP mini direct mount. They're actually really popular right now. They're smaller than any of the CP ASAs that are out there. The direct ones are, the regular ones are a little bit bigger, a little bulkier. The minis are definitely, they're just streamlined. And I use these on my projects. I've got a couple of LCD Angels that I did a little while ago, and I use these specifically just because I liked how compact it was. Again, I do recommend those if you like a nice simple ASA. When you're taking your particular A4 has a volumizer, you're going to want to keep an eye on the bobbin and the spring that is going to be on the valve side, and that's because sometimes this little guy will shoot out, go all over the place. It's made out of plastic, so if you happen to drop it just right, you could break off one of these fins, and then it will sit, it may still work, but I would recommend, always making sure that it's all in one piece. There's a reason that, Angel made them so every part fits and every part does a thing. That would also include, they not being broken or not being, damaged. Again, use caution. Anytime there's something spring-loaded, you have the option and possibly losing parts. It's just one of those things. I tend to try to keep my area that I'm working on tidy, just because of the fact that I know that little springs and buttons and stuff like that become very difficult to find if they roll underneath things or if they fall onto the floor. Again, nice and tidy, nice and neat. One thing I like to do, during the video is I like to point out what I have for tools that I use. Typically I'll use the Angel toolkit that can be found sometimes online. They are included with the A1. I just find that for the most part they have all of the pieces that I need. If you like a larger Allen key, longer reach, not a problem. Most hardware stores have them. I believe Eklund sells sets of metric and regular, threaded Allen keys. They have a number of long ones, short ones, and essentially everything you're going to need. And I've also found that some places sell them individually, which is pretty nice also. You're going to want to have your jeweler's pliers, and that is going to be for your snap ring that you're going to find in your mini reg. Really not a lot of easy ways to take that out. I've seen people say, oh, well, you can take two of these and you can put them together and then you can clamp them together with pliers. And yeah, no, it works, but it is extremely sketchy. You have that little circlip come undone when it's not inside here and it's out here in this area, trust me, you're going to be looking for that for quite some time. Sometimes I've actually had people say they've lost it. And it's weird because you would think you'd be able to find it in your work area or whatever, but I'm telling you, the little tiny little bits and pieces, and when they ricochet and fly all over the place, gone. I have my Leatherman tool that I like because I like, after I take out the circlip, I like to be able to, nice flat hard surface, and the internals will slide right out. It's just something that I've had for years. I found that it comes in handy. I use a set of adjustable pliers. You'll probably see them just kind of sitting off to the side, mainly because of the fact that when you go to take the screw out of the vertical ASA, I use a longer Allen key, and I usually like it, for the leverage factor. I mean, if I use a shorter one, doesn't really matter, but I still like to have the leverage on there to be able to, turn that and to loosen that up. The only other thing I really, would recommend is picks. You don't have to have a whole bunch of them, but I'd recommend having one of them because it comes in handy for when you want to take out, O-rings. It's just one of those things, or you want to clean out grooves in your threads, screws and stuff like that. Like, this thing's got, some paint in it. It's never a bad thing. Really, it's kind of like having, being versatile, I guess would the word that I'm looking for. If you have versatility in your tools, and you have a good assortment of them, it certainly makes, your mission, which is to work on your own gun, easier. So we're going to go ahead, and like I said, I am, just taking that off because it's one of those things that it's just right there. It's easy to get to. And I go ahead, take my circlip pliers, my jeweler's pliers, circlip pliers. I call them by all kinds of names. You can get actual circlip pliers if you want at the hardware store. They're, typically range from $10 to all the way up to $40 and $50, depending on how fancy you want to get. I find that they some of them work really well. Try to go with some that have the adjustable points that are, because these holes are small. And sometimes some of the circlips are like big mechanic, like car ones, and you're going to find that they won't fit. So again, try to buy them if you're going to buy a pair that have a bunch of the smaller tips. All right, so we've got that out of the way, which is awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and get the internals out. Now, typically, it only takes a couple of shots to be able to get that loose. And I'm going to point out one thing that is kind of interesting, and I've seen this happen in a few guns lately, especially, mainly because people can't find the right parts. So they go ahead and they go down to their hardware store and they say, you know what, that'll fit around it, so I'll go ahead and I'll throw that into my reg. Yeah, because, when Angel was producing a $1,000, $1,200 marker, they said, you know what, if somebody doesn't have this little shim right here, let's go ahead and make it so they can take one of these galvanized, lumps of metal and throw it into the reg, and they can make up the pressure they need. Kids, if you need to put this into that, and then into that, you're doing it wrong. There is no other explanation. I'm sorry. At that point, you just need to box everything up, put it away, never touch it again, because you're doing it wrong. And this is not acceptable, ever. And some people might be like, wow, dude, that's kind of harsh. No, it really isn't. Because when somebody buys this and they spend, now they spend a couple of $100s on it, they're not expecting shade tree mechanic, shenanigans. Okay? They're expecting proper shims. They're expecting proper O-rings. They're, expecting it to be lubed properly, not to be, lubed with gun oil that you can buy for, your Smith & Wesson. They're expecting it to be done properly and maintained properly. They're not expecting you to go down to your hardware store and purchase stuff that you can find in a bin somewhere. So that's getting thrown out because that's just a terrible idea. So now we're going to take the velocity adjuster out. And usually when I'm doing that, I'm also keeping in mind the way that it comes out of the body, making sure that it's not coming out hard or it's not coming out gritty. And I say that because these are subject to, they're outside the body. They're not, covered up or whatnot. They're subjected to, dirt and grime and stuff like that. And so again, when you're taking everything apart, kind of keep an eye on what, how it comes out. What it sounds like, if something's squeaking or if something's, sounds or feels gritty, then at that point you're going to want to spend a little bit more time cleaning out the threads and whatnot. Who knows? Maybe the gun was used, in a very dusty, dirty environment. Either way, you can fix certain problems, and that being one of them. If the threads are kind of gritty or whatnot, you can always clean it out. The one thing that I do like to tell people when they're taking their regs apart and they're looking around at them is, one, you take a look at the top of the seat, see if it's, been, banged up or beat up, or if there's any scratches or whatnot, or gouges. Especially this surface right here needs to be nice and flat, needs to be clean, because it mates with this surface. And this surface has an O-ring that has been pressed onto the top of this little piston, and they go together and they seal. And if this little piston, O-ring is missing, there won't be any seal there, allowing a lot of air to go all the way up in and then around and through. Trust me, on a low pressure gun, you don't want that to happen. So always make sure that you observe, and look at the condition of your reg internals. These are in really good shape. I'm actually quite happy with that. So that's a plus. All right, the next thing I like to do, especially with the A4s, you're going to have a gauge that's going to be right here. You can go ahead and you can unthread that. It's really the only way that you're going to be able to get to the one screw that's on the outside of the vertical ASA, because it's hidden. It's right there. The A4 Fly does not have that gauge, which is interesting, because you would think that they would also want to, kind of keep an eye on the pressures, and they're not interchangeable. The A4, vertical ASA with the gauge is not interchangeable. You can't put it on the A4 Fly. Kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. So each platform definitely has its positives and its negatives. Now what I'm doing is, there's a screw inside here, a bolt. I'm going and loosening that so I can take the vertical ASA right off. And that in turn will expose the back side of it. This gun's got a lot of grease, not a lot of grease. It's got a lot of oil, which I'm going to guess is somebody troubleshooting a leak. Typically when there's a lot of oil on everything, especially, the underside of the bodies and everything like that, that means that somebody's been trying, or usually been trying to seal up a leak. They don't want to take the gun apart. They don't know how to take the gun apart, which is fine by me. Go ahead and send it in at that point if you're not comfortable with it. But again, adding oil sometimes might fix the problem, but most of the time only prolongs it. Might take care of it for a few minutes. Might be able to go out and test the gun out in your backyard or whatnot, take it to the field, and then suddenly the leak pops back up. So your best bet is to take it apart and figure out why it's doing that. Next is going to be the board. What I like to do at this point is I like to unplug it. I don't have to unplug the green wires because it's hooked up to your Sensi pad. The only reason that I don't have to take that off is because it's actually embedded inside the frame, in which when I take the frame off, you'll see. The board is held on with 2 bolts, 2 screws right here. They're Phillips, and this one's actually missing one. No big deal. I've got those. But you want to have both of them in there because, as you can see, this thing moves around. And if you're running around out in the woods and stuff like that and you happen to jar it or whatnot, with this movement, you can also, the screen can move and whatnot. And we want to kind of keep this one in good shape because the screen and for the board is actually in really good shape. There's no pixels missing. That's awesome. That's a huge plus, especially with the electronics being as old as they are. You have a success and fail rate, on these, and alarmingly, these boards have been coming up lately with just fail after fail. They're losing pixels. Some of them don't work at all. Some of the boards are just shot. A lot of the times, though, people are mistaking a bad board with a bad battery. Which I'm going to, before I take this all completely apart, I'm actually going to show you what a bad battery looks like. This one has a bad battery, and I want to show you the difference between the two. That way you won't, just automatically, say, oh, my board's bad, I'm going to need a new board. And I look it up and it's $55 or $65. And, that's crazy. And I don't know if I want to spend that on this gun. One thing that people need to remember and understand is these used to be, $1,000 to $1,200. So spending $45, $55, $65 on a board, it's really not that much. Not when you're talking about the same technology. It's just older. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and plug the battery back in, and I'm going to turn it on. And as you can see the flickering and see the sketchiness. The thing is you have a system that requires a full charged battery. And when it's not fully charged, you're going to run into this problem where it's dimming, it's flickering, it's, acting up. Now let's go ahead and plug in the new battery and see if we get anything different. Now, here is where I could be wrong. Maybe the board is no good, or maybe it's just the battery. You guys get to see it as I get to see it. Yeah, bad battery. As I suspected, but again, I like to kind of put it all out there. I'm not perfect. I don't know everything. But there are certain things that kind of, after a while, drop right into the mold of, or formula of, what I consider, just reoccurring things. Again, the battery doing what it was doing, not having enough juice to actually get to the next stage of the boot up. There's steps, and it didn't have enough juice to get to the next step that the board requires. As you can see, it put the new battery in. It's got a full charge. Bang, goes through all the boot up, and then live. Awesome, great. Can't wait to get this one up and running. So now that we've gotten to that point, now that we realize that, yes, it is the, it is the battery. That's awesome. Going to go ahead, and I'm going to undo this one screw here. And, well, we've all talked about this before. And about how people over torque things and how people, wrench on things, and essentially they just go ahead and just tighten things up like it's a car, but it's not. It's a paintball marker. This happens. Yeah. That's kind of ugly. All the plastic is completely shot all the way around the board. But Kevin, no need to worry because I have plastics and we'll get you all taken care of. So this will get fixed also. It's just one more thing to put to the list. No big deal. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put that off to the side. So again, before said that we didn't have to swap this out. We didn't have to, when you unplug this, you didn't have to do anything else. But if we look in here, we can see this pad is completely shot. The part that actually registers a ball being dropped onto the pin, which is right here, this runs all the way up and sits underneath the feed neck. The balls drop down in. They hit that, and then this just slightly just goes, pushes down. And when it pushes down on this, and it taps it. As you can see, this whole thing's completely done. I mean, at one point somebody did take the frame off, and when they put it back on, they actually squished the wires. So the wires are exposed there. If they touch off on the frame, this system won't work. So we just go ahead and pluck that on out of there. Try to get more of a, right there. You can see that's no good. So add that to the junk pile. Now what we're going to do is I like to remove all of the buttons, mainly because when I do a teardown, I go ahead and I clean the entire marker. This whole thing's going to get cleaned up. You see all the paint? There's paint, there's some dirt in there. That doesn't help your trigger. And you can see this one's kind of sticking a little bit. That one should just easily swing up and down. Shouldn't have any issues. It's kind of sticky. Good cleaning takes care of that, not a problem. We have on the frame, we have a set screw that holds the pin in place for the trigger. It's pretty slick because back in the day, they actually hammered them in and used pressure, meaning the hole was smaller than the pin, and the pin was just pounded into the frames. A lot of people, when they wanted to switch triggers out and stuff like that, grab the punch. In fact, I think I have one sitting over here. They grab the punch like this. They go ahead and they try to line it up, and they go ahead and they smack it with the hammer, and this thing goes and it dings off the frame. Suddenly, your nice mint Angel is mint no longer. Now, sometimes you're going to run into, as you can see, the trigger's in there pretty good, the pin. Now, that's not an issue. I'm not that worried. I do have, like I just showed you, I do have a punch. But see, I'm a little bit smarter. I can actually get it right in there. And then we can go ahead and push that right out. Right now it's loose. It's at that point where it'll just come right out. So let's go ahead and push it out. It's rusty. It's dirty. It will get cleaned with a Dremel wire attachment. Shine that right back up. And as you can see here, Angel was notorious for using steel with aluminum. It's such a bad mix. Other companies, automotive have learned the hard way. Ford used to make a, all aluminum motor, and then they would use aluminum bolts. Steel bolts to attach the manifolds to the block. And after years and years and years of them heating up and cooling down, you would get leaks on the gaskets. You wanted to go swap the gaskets out, you would go ahead and you would try to remove the bolts, and the bolts would break off inside the aluminum because steel and aluminum does this. It will rust, it will, get dirty, it will become, like I had to punch this, out. They will start to really adhere to one another. So again, clean everything. When I put this back in, I'm going to put grease on it. Going to make it easier when coming back apart. Again, this is no big deal. That happens all the time, and nobody's to blame for that. As for like cleaning and stuff like that, you can see this whole frame, it's got like dirt on it, it's got old paint and everything like that. Unfortunately, people just don't take care of these guns like they used to. I know that for years I used to see people do full complete teardowns of their guns every time that they were done playing, and I'd be like, wow, that seems really like tedious. But then I realized later on it was really smart. And that's kind of what drew me to to this business and to this hobby, is that I get to take care of stuff that's neglected. And I might complain and I might make fun of people that put washers in in regs, and they don't clean their paint and stuff like that. But I'm actually very grateful, because without those people I wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to work on guns. I wouldn't be able to watch them, come back to life, and see people excited to be playing with their Angel that's been sitting in their closet for 10 or 12 years. I've got a guy that's actually sending 2 of them in. I just spoke with him, and one is his and the other one's his son's. And I think that's really awesome that they're using old Angel LCDs, and they're both super excited to be doing so. So I think that's really cool. Now what I did here was I took out these are vernier wheels, and what you do is they help adjust your trigger, and trigger adjustment is strictly personal. It's how you like the trigger to feel. There's no right or wrong, but after you get it set, you go ahead and you tighten these screws, and they go and they push in on the metal and the plastic, and they push in on the metal that pushes into the plastic, and then it holds it in place. It's actually pretty slick. Again, Angel was way ahead of their time when it came to adjustments, and it came to making things work. Granted, they over-engineered a lot of things, which some people find frustrating. For me, I always find it amazing, because again, they were doing it way before anybody else was. Now, normally with a feed neck, you'd have to use heat, and you would have to use curse words. I got lucky. This one is coming off just like that, because there's no thread lock. All the threads have been clean. I have a suspicion that this was done before it was sent to me, but could be wrong. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take the back plate off, drop the screws all over the place, just like I said not to do before. And I'm going to watch out here, because there is a spring. It's not always fully loaded, but it's still a spring. You go ahead and you can pull that right out. Put that in a safe spot, because like I said, they'll disappear on you. And I kind of cheated a little bit. I took this out before, and when I did, it was kind of a pain, because as you can see, there's a lot of rust. That'll get cleaned up as long as it's salvageable. Right now what I'm doing is I am undoing the back plate from the toggle switch for the battery. I'm going to go ahead and take that apart. There's an O-ring there as a buffer, and then when you get to a certain point, you can turn on the back plate. There's a on and an off, so if you want it to coincide, then you can twist it and you can get it to stay right where you want. It's pretty slick. And now what I want to do is I want to take the solenoid out and the battery out, mainly because those are the 2 wires that are hanging out of the bottom of the marker at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and find my proper size Allen key. I'm going to go ahead and remove the back plate, the solenoid plate. And of course, wow, look at that. That's interesting. See how wet that is? That's a lot of oil, boys and girls. That is not needed. Somebody was definitely trying to find a leak or fix a leak. This A4 definitely has some miles on it. You can tell by the bolt. You can tell by the breech. It's got some silver in there. It's starting to get some wear. Still going to be a great shooter, but you know, it's got some age. It's got some miles. People have been using it, which is good. The tip is soft, which is perfect because as soon as that dries out, it will break, fly off. A buddy of mine just sent in a gun and the tip promptly shot off the front of the bolt after he aired it up. Went to go use it. He's kind of bummed out now. Now he has to figure out how to fix that. So right now what I'm doing is I'm trying my hardest to be gentle and take this off. Normally you don't have to use this much force. But this one has a significant amount of gelled paint in the back. And actually I think, okay, yeah, no, that's good. That's all right. I was starting to think that maybe when somebody put the solenoid in, that they put it in improperly and it was pushing up against this plate, because this thing is a bear. This thing is not coming out easy. Yeah, that's unfortunate too, because somebody actually greased it, you can see, in probably an attempt to make it slide better, but it's not going to when it has a bunch of grit and a bunch of dirt in it. So again, take your time, especially when taking these apart and putting them back together. Make sure you clean all of your surfaces. Anything that's anodized, wash it, clean it. You can use an ultrasonic washer. You can use Dawn. You can use a toothbrush and, you know, hot water. Perfect. You know, whatever works for you, whatever gets the job done and allows you to put your gun back together squeaky clean. That's the key. You know, we want to make sure that the gun goes back together clean, greased properly. You know, all threaded areas need to have the dirt and grit and grime removed from them when you put everything back together. You can see there's a lot of paint and a lot of grit all underneath the side here. It's pretty common. You know, it's just the way it is. Some markers get treated better than others. One thing I do want to point out is when you're looking at the gaskets and the on the plate for the solenoid and whatnot, this one's usually always good and can be reused. This one right here is the one that I like to focus on, because if it's got a lot of compression, it's got a lot of oil or a lot of grease on it or whatnot. If it's a thicker gasket and it's starting to get separation, you know, because stuff's starting to get inside the layers, at that point you're going to want to swap it out. You know, for this one, it's got a bunch of compression. It looks flat. You know, in a bunch of spots, and it's starting to lift a little bit. So we're probably going to go ahead and swap one out. You know, and it's just because of longevity. This gentleman that I'm doing the gun for is going to have this gun for a while. He's actually a big fan of the A4 platform, in which case I want to make sure that I get it back to him with everything taken care of. And again, that's one of those things where we like to cover all of our bases. Some people are very particular with their markers. He's actually, you know, quite knowledgeable, and I like to, you know, talk with him and, you know, bounce stuff off of him. But again, I also want to make sure that the gun is going to be in his possession and it's going to be perfect for years to come. All right. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, you know, we've got the solenoid out, we've got the battery out. I'm going to go ahead and take the detents off. They're on the sides, there's two of them. There's a flathead screwdriver indentation in which you can go ahead and you can put yours in there. What you want to do is you want to try to make sure that the screwdriver is roughly the same width and the same length as the indentation, because if you get one that's too small, it'll gouge them up. I've seen these things mangled because people use screwdrivers that they definitely shouldn't be using, and you're going to get some damage. On this one, there's some damage right there and some damage there and there. So somebody used a really long one, you know, and it was actually, you know, it went from edge to edge, and when they were turning it, they managed to, you know, expose some raw aluminum. It happens. You know, you can't exactly, you know, fault somebody for it, but unfortunately, you know, someone did it. It didn't just, you know, wake up, you know, the next day and suddenly those marks were there. Somebody definitely did that. The detents are going to get replaced, mainly because of the fact that they are worn down. You can see here, this one's actually worn down at an angle, in which, you know, the bolt was, you know, it was hitting it, and that's going to happen. That's why these are wear items, and they're replaceable. You can take them apart. The springs will get cleaned up, and then the detents will get replaced. This particular detent also has an O-ring, which is ironically the same size as the breech O-ring on a LCD. So if you have any of those, and then you can swap them out on that. I'd recommend giving these a good cleaning inside and out. That way the spring moves and actuates and doesn't hang up on the inside of the housing. If there's any, you know, scuffs or any, you know, marks. I've seen some of these before that have been used so much that all the anodizing has exposed the aluminum and made it rough. In which case, at that point, I tell people, you know, you have a choice. You can either continue using them and hope that the spring, you know, does what it needs to do, or we can swap it out and we can get you going with a, you know, brand new pair. The breech seal is going to come off. Use a pick or a, you know, a tool similar to that, and I'm only showing you and telling you that, you know, the reason why this is coming off, because it needs to be cleaned. It can be reused. It can be actually glued back in. The original adhesive is no good, but there is oil underneath here, and when that happens, it's going to interfere with the adhesive that is on the breech, and you can see it's still stuck to the, you know, the breech itself, but it did not stick to the breech seal. That's because there's oil now, you know, mixed in and introduced, and it is going to, you know, come apart. You know, and also if the seal is not flat and flush, then when you close the breech, you're going to have a bit of a, you know, it's not going to be a flat surface anymore. You're going to have something that's going to essentially push the breech up a little bit, and believe it or not, just that little bit of misalignment cause bolt stick. And if you have bolt stick and you don't notice it, you can be playing all day, not a problem. You can be playing for a month, not a problem. And then it's going to, at one point, it's going to cause a problem. Most of the time when bolt stick happens, especially on Angels, the only thing that is really involved, you know, with it, meaning, you know, that's affected by it, unfortunately, is your ram, because when the bolt goes forward and it can't complete its full cycle, the ram essentially is being, it's hitting a wall. It still wants to, you know, go forward, complete its cycle, come up here, hit the valve, open that up, let all the air out, and away we go. But it can't. So at that point, it also wants to evacuate all the air that it's got inside it, which it will do through its internal seal. And if you happen to go through a seal on an A4 ram, it's not a good thing. And I'm going to point out why it's not a good thing in just a second. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull the ram out. a ram tool. If you don't have one, I recommend getting one. It has the 2 prongs that'll fit in the back of the ram. You can unscrew it, it comes right out. It is essentially one of those tools that you should have if you're working on your own Angel. The other tool that you should have is your LPR tool. It screws into the front of your LPR and allows for you to pull out the piston that moves back and forth that has your shims. That allows you to fine-tune and adjust the LPR when needed. And I mean, I've seen these come up. Whole kits come up cheap. No reason for you not to have one. The other thing I recommend is a gauge. Plugs into your LPR. Tells you what your LPR pressure is. Allows you to fine-tune it. If you're trying to just guess what your LPR pressure is, it's not going to help you. If your gun's shooting really loud and you're going through a lot of air, clearly you have a problem at some point. Sometimes hooking your LPR gauge up and seeing your pressures 100 plus might give you an indication of what's wrong with your marker at that point. I tell people, and you'll see this in my later videos, the A1 platform, if you're going to be taking your gun apart and putting it back together because it's not shooting properly, or you have, it's really loud, or it's, consuming a lot of air, and you don't have gauges, don't even bother taking it apart, because there is no way you're going to be able to tune that within a particular, reliability without them. It's just not going to happen. Now, when I was pointing out to you the A4 RAM, and if it goes bad, it goes bad for good, kids. Mainly because in a sheer stroke of brilliance, Angel made the A4 RAM completely unserviceable. And I say unserviceable because the average Joe is not going to be taking this thing apart. And you can go ahead and you can look at it and you can say, well, we could. No. You're going to be replacing a RAM. There is literally no way to take this apart. It's sealed in the back. It's not threaded. There's no way to get this apart. Unless you have super expensive machines, then you can try to get this part out and then try to seal it back up again without damaging it completely. Trust me, easier to find another RAM. I do believe that this one is, going to be in good shape. That's bench testing right there. It's something that's really easy to do. Make sure that you plug the 3 holes that are in the back. They're going to be offset, so you kind of have to hold it all weird. But if you get a good seal on it, it should always snap right back. That shows that there's good suction, that there's a good O-ring, good seal inside. Awesome. That's what we like to see. That just means it's one less part that you have to replace. All right, now we're going to get right down to, pretty much the end of the video. There's only a couple more pieces that are going to come out. Right now I'm taking out the copse rod and I'm taking out the base plate. Mainly because I'm going to show you that there's 2 O-rings here. If you ever have any sort of leak or you ever have any sort of issue, in this general area right here, it's probably going to be an O-ring. Now, the one thing I do want to point out, if you take off the frame and you notice there's leaking and you have your air system is hooked up and, maybe you're bench testing and you've got it sitting right here and you're like, it's leaking. The frame off of it, the frame covers part of this and holds down the back part of this. The frame covers up just a little bit. Believe it or not, that little bit seals it. So always test this for leaks with the vertical ASA on it and the frame. Because if you don't, you will get a leak in this general area. And that's strictly because this needs to be in and the frame needs to be on it in order to seal it properly. Now we've got a couple of body pins here. They should just come right out. This one's got a little bit of rust. You can clean it up with a wire wheel, or you can give me a call. I literally have, let's see if I can find it. I've got a whole bin of them. Those, because they've been stored forever, have a little bit of surface rust. Now, difference between surface rust and rust that's actually starting to pit and pock the pin. Surface rust can be cleaned off with Scotch-Brite, be dremeled off with a wire wheel, and made look like that. Pitted is going to have some sort of like indentations, and it's going to come back. The rust will. Now it's not a big deal. It's only holding things in place. But again, cleaner is better. I think we've already gone over that, and I think we all agree. Now the one thing I want to do is I want to take the front plug off for the LPR. And this one's gritty. There's definitely some grit. When you run into something like this, and you can see stuff coming out of, there's grease, grit. There was like a hair. I don't even know. I don't want to know. But when you run into an issue like this, okay, and it starts getting tough, just stop. Just stop right there, because you never know how bad it can get. Okay, I can tell you how bad it can get. You can strip this out, and then you can start looking for ways to get that plug out under extreme duress. Now, what we want to do here is, we have a situation where I'm starting to feel some tension. So I go ahead, and these things should just screw out almost, easily. You should be able to take a couple of fingers and back it right out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, and this is an automotive trick, okay? This is something that I learned as a mechanic, is go ahead and go back in with it, okay? You go back in with it because it will expose more of what you're running into, and your problem. Now, with this problem, we've got this grit here, and I can actually free that up with my pick. You can use compressed air. You can just blow on it. It's cheaper. And then just go ahead. And again, when you get to this point, go ahead and wipe off anything that's coming out with it. Now, that's coming out easier than it was before. Now, I've gotten to a point now where I'm kind of at the, that point where I'm like, okay, I feel good about this. I can see exposed threads. I can see that they're kind of grimy, but I've got I've got it out. I've got it 3/4 of the way out. Now, you can see here, you see all the silver. That is, that's going to need to all be cleaned up. I'll be using a wire wheel, on my Dremel. I've got a nylon wire wheel, and so it won't take any anodizing off. It'll just clean out the grit, because it's actually got burrs, which means somebody, when they put this back in, it has some dirt and some grit in it, because these threads have got dirt and grit in them also. They'll get cleaned up. But again, I'm just pointing out to you what happens. If you run into some sort of, you run into, an instance where it's gritty, go ahead and put it back in, and then clean out the threads that are exposed after you put it back in, because it will drop down a thread or two. Clean out those threads and then back it back out. You should be able to get that out without an issue. If you run into an issue in which you can't get it out, that's not a problem. I'm always here. I can help you with it. No big deal. Now, I'm going to go ahead and push out the valve system, or valve stem actually. We've already taken out the rest of it, but there's the valve stem and the LPR. And, a little bit of violence there, but that's why we have, put down something. This is a neoprene, mat, which I love. I got it from Inception Designs. Simon makes really cool stuff. But this has been something I've had for a couple of years, and I love it. Mainly because it adds that cushion that I need, especially if I'm, pushing out something and it hits here. It's not like it's hitting the table and, putting dents and stuff. So that helps. Again, take off all your O-rings. When you put the new O-rings on, a little skim coat of grease, nothing major. That doesn't move. It always stays right where it is. This top one does move, so you can put a little bit more grease on that one. But these other two, Just a little skim coat. Make them look wet. That's it. Now, everybody likes to see breech pin removal. So we're going to go ahead and show you breech pin removal. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get to the breech pins because someone has managed to put a whole lot of dirt inside here. Or paint. Who knows? Might be a little bit of both. It's no big deal. We'll get it all out. Just takes a minute. I mean, if you find that you're like me, I am always moving. I'm always reading. I'm always doing something. I can't really sit still. I figure, you know, I'll have plenty of time to do that when I'm dead. So I'm moving. I'm doing stuff. And, you know, this helps. Believe it or not. It helps with, you know, ADD, and it helps with OCD, both of which I have, and this is how I cope with it. Now, we go ahead and we want to remove the set screw. Again, there's going to be grit and dirt. It's going to come out with it. Wipe it off as you're going along. You know, I mean, we're going to be cleaning this body anyway. Not a big deal if it drops down in there. It's all going to be getting removed. Nothing gets left. All of these are going to get cleaned out. They're going to be nice and, you know, sparkling clean. Now we're going to want to take our breech pin removal tool, which is a 1.5 millimeter screw. Go ahead and thread it in there. Now, this is the tricky part. I tell people all the time, if you're going to be doing this, make sure that you get a good screw that, you know, has got, you know, the proper threads and everything like that, and put a good amount of threads into the pin, mainly because you're going to want the best bite that you can get. I use my Leatherman, you know, occasionally. I use, you know, a nice rubber handled set of adjustable pliers, and I go ahead and I put this like that. Let me see if I can get this centered. And then I go ahead and I use leverage. Okay, now we've gotten to that point where the pin's starting to come out a little bit. Boom. I have so many stories I could tell you about breech pins not coming out. I mean, horror stories, ones that will scare your unborn children. But today is not one of those days in which we're going to talk about that, because this one came right out. Awesome. I love that. Going to go ahead and get the back set screw out. There you go. That's good. Nice. If these are stripped, the back ones or the front ones, whatever, if one of them is stripped, you need to stop what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you need to stop what you're doing and you need to contact the machinist. Someone that has experience in taking these out, because after they're stripped and they're in there, I usually tell people just leave them, because there's no reason for them to come out, and you are going to absolutely hate working on these from that point on if you try to get them out. And I'm only saying that because the average Joe is not going to say, oh, well, maybe I can use the next size up and just hammer it in there and it'll probably grab, and then, you know, I can get it out that way. 2 thumbs up right there. That's what I do. And it works 99% of the time. I go from metric to standard, picks up the slack and a strip screw. Adios. Comes right out. So now we're at that point where I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put that in. Now I can tell all of this is loose. I don't have to use leverage. Essentially, you know, you can, I mean, okay, fine. It actually wants leverage. So here we go. We'll do it again. I'm not against it. There you go. it was sticking just a little bit. So again, wire wheel, clean them up. When you're putting them back in, a little bit of grease. I tend to use Planet Eclipse grease. Find it works really good. It's available at every, paintball place ever. They make great product. Everyone knows I like this stuff. Boom. Breech block removed. Everything will be cleaned out. New breech seal put in. All of the grime, all the grit, everything will be cleaned. It's awesome. I love it. I love clean guns. Pipe cleaners. Use pipe cleaners in any area that a pin goes in, and you will thank me later, because it will clean out everything that you cannot get to and you can't see. Pipe cleaners are number one. It's the one thing that I tell people all the time. If you're going to be going to a hobby store, buy a package of them. They'll last you for 500 years. You'll be passing those on to like your grandkids. They're great. But again, they come in these huge packages. It's crazy, but they work awesome. They clean out these passages, and they get all the things that water won't get. And if you're like me, you like to use stuff that is readily available rather than having to hunt down stuff that is exotic or, at the far reaches of the internet. The last piece that I took off right there, you can see is solenoid, housing block off plug. There's a really, really small set screw, and then it holds this in place. Pop that out. And there you go. And if at any point you're doing like an anno job or whatever, there's a air passage screw here. You're going to want to heat this body up. Use a heat gun, propane, until you can smell the Loctite, and then you can back that out. Air passage screw here. Again, heat until you can smell the Loctite. Loosening up, bang, that'll come right out. And last but not least, another one in the very far back. This channel runs the entire length of the gun, puts air through here, puts air up here. It's amazing. And also puts air to your ram. Again, I hope that you learned some things, and I hope that I didn't bore you too much. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them below, and I will try to get to them as quickly as I can. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll have more videos for you. So if you have a different angel and you're waiting, don't worry, I'm on my way.